as a human being living today, we have to decide when we're trying to save the world, utilizing that terminology, we have to decide what world we're trying to save. I think a lot of us automatically assume it's the world that we can see with our eyes all around us. But I'm not interested in saving that world. I'm not interested in saving a world that churns, mountainsides into profit and just, a couple miles down the road as we speak, 3,000 acres of old growth hardwood forest is being, deforested by a logging company that literally owns millions of acres. And they're going to do it in about a week, week and a half. I mean, an entire 500-year ecosystem is being destroyed in a singular week for the idea of product. That's not the world that I want to save, if I can be very frank and in particular. And so we have to not just one, let the idea. There you go. That's the question. And long I've wrestled with it. What is the world that we want to save? And the same indigenous friend of mine, Lakota, I was in a conversation that I mentioned earlier. I was in a conversation with him about this very subject because, in the writing of this book, the publisher I'm working with to some degree wants me to answer this question, because it's really the question of the book. What are we really trying to save here? And I was talking to him, and he said something that changed my life. He says, Daniel, in a lot of indigenous oral mythologies or histories, we have this recurrent idea that the earth ends and is reborn. It ends and is reborn. If you study the history of the Hopi believe that we are, I think, at the beginning of the fourth world. I might be wrong. It might be the sixth or seventh. I'm getting my different mythologies confused. But the Lakota, he tells me, right now we are living at the end of a 500-year prophecy, as I understand it, or as I understood his words. We are living at the end of a 500-year prophecy, where at the end of this 500 years, the world's going to end. Now, not in some biblical perspective, not in some cataclysmic, nuclear disaster, but the world as we know it will end. And he says, what will be reborn in what the Lakota believe to be the fifth world is open. We have no idea. We have no idea, but all we can do, and this is very similar to what Dugald Hein in Sweden is writing at work at the ruins, is we can be good ancestors, right? Because what my friend, the Lakota gentleman, told us was, our descendants, our grandchildren, right, are going to walk in the dreams that you and I have. They're going to be dream walkers in their ancestors' dreams. And so his point was, instead of trying to focus to save what we have built, we must let it go and simply become ancestors. Live life as a human, live life relating to humanity in a way that humanity needs to be related with, not to give up, not to step back in some, exceptional hermit-like release, but to step into it, become an ancestor that your descendants living in the fifth world, if you see it from the Lakota perspective, will look back on and say, wow, Chris was my great-grandfather. Look what he set up so that we could live. Because in some degree, I mean, this is really the crux of the thing. I've said this multiple times in the past, but I share it with you here. I believe we're living at a crucial time where we have the decision to be an ancestor or not. And what I mean by that is this. I truly believe that I will hold my grandchild in the future if I have the blessing to live that long to have grandchildren. And I will hold them up and they will either look at me and they will say, grandfather, thank you. Because of you and many people like you, forsaking convenience, whatever it is, living in a very intentional life, forgoing some luxuries, not some others, whatever it might be, because of the way that you and many others like you lived, we have water, we have air to breathe, and we have food to eat, right? We have communities that cherish us and we cherish our communities. Or on the alternative, we will hold up our grandchildren and they're going to look at you and I and they're going to say, grandfather, what happened? You guys had water and now we don't have water and we kill each other over it. You guys had land. All of the land is desert now. What did water feel like as it fell from the heavens? They're not going to know this reality. Or maybe they're going to know so much of water that they're not going to know the opposite. What did it feel like to be dry? Right? They're going to fight wars over food and water and everything else. And we're in this weird moment, very similar to what I think social media was like 20 years ago, where it existed, but it didn't exist as a covering force over society. Today, social media runs a lot of, societal developments and everything else. And there was a weird moment where all could be, but all was not. And I think the same thing is true in this moment, but from an ecological perspective. Right now, we live in what is really the end of a Goldilocks epoch. Climatically, geologically, we live at the end of this 10 to 15,000 year long period of a really healthy climate, etc. But also, wealth and stability. And, I went to college and I never thought, do I go to college or do I focus on saving the world? Like that was never a thought when I went to college. Like we're really at the end of a Goldilocks epoch, and we have the ability to make the decision when we hold our grandchildren in the future, where they look at us, living in the fifth world or whatever it might be, this new world, this new emerging reality where biodiversity is us and we are the biodiversity. And will they say what happened or thank you? Right. And that's going to look different for everyone. Like if you're an urbanite living in a city, what that means is, in my opinion, find a local farm, find somebody who cares, find someone who is running an agricultural endeavor or hunting endeavor that is producing nutrient rich food on nutrient dense, healing, building, covered vegetative soils, and create a relationship with them. I'm not saying that you have to become a farmer, and I'm definitely not saying that you have to start a 400-acre rewilding landscape. And if you're listening to this and you're an agriculturalist yourself, I think we have to start questioning ourselves and working in our own way to understand what is the motive behind our work. And that is to say, what is really the impulse behind what we're trying to achieve? If it's simply self-understanding, and through that self-understanding and self-becoming, we're trying to create and nurture this community that evolves and adapts together, or are we trying to control biodiversity's return, right? And so, exactly what this looks like for you is entirely, as complex as who you are and where you are. But I think to recap here, the first two things is we have to let two things die. The first of which is our idea that we can control our way out of this. And when we get through that, we have to then decide, what are we trying to preserve? What are we trying to save? So for me, to be very clear, we're trying to preserve the idea of a local community, of localism, of agrarianism, of farmers and community members working together in some co-creative abundance, where food is not just something that occupies the table, but it's this living story that when we partake, we are incorporating the stories of those lives. It's not protein, right? It's a story of protein. When we breathe in, we literally are incorporating that breath into our cellular memory. It's becoming us as much as we're becoming it. And so that's the world that we're trying to save.